Hello, everyone. This is Ron Bush, and you're listening to the Information Playground. You may be viewing us on YouTube, but if you're listening to us on WVLP, you're probably in Northwest Indiana, perhaps in Valparaiso. We're located on the FM dial at 103.1. We're aired on Monday mornings from 8 to 9 and Friday afternoons from 1 to 2. You can also stream us from WVLP at wvlp.org. I encourage you to check out their website. They're a great community radio station. They do a lot in the community, and you can become involved in that. You can be part of the community and be involved in giving back as well. You can also find us on just about any podcast platform, starting with Spotify and Apple and Google, on to the rest of them. Or you can watch us on YouTube, all under the name The Information Playground. And all three names are important because that seems to be a popular name. It isn't Information Playground, it's The Information Playground. So that said, um, we're coming to you today. I'm Ron Bush. I own Ron Bush Consulting, and we underwrite this program. Ron Bush Consulting is a cybersecurity company, a corporation, and we help businesses protect themselves, their clients, their employees against cyber crime and cyber criminals. That said, the Information Playground is designed to deal with information of all types, not just cyber information or technologically oriented information programs, but all types of information. We have a special guest with us today, Timothy Ward. Timothy has co-written or co-authored a book with Gleb Tsipursky. Some of you may recall Gleb was on the show, probably a few months ago now, on his book, Never Go With Your Gut. It was a fascinating book, and I still find a lot of use for all the different biases he covered. It's a fascinating book. Um, Timothy has co-authored ProTruth, and Timothy, would you tell the folks a little bit about yourself? We're going to be talking about ProTruth, but perhaps just an introduction into it, what it's about, how you came to write it with Gleb. Looking forward to having you on today's program.
Thank you, Ron. I'm so happy to be here today with you and, of course, with your listeners. So, ProTruth is all about the importance of truthfulness in politics. And I came to the subject of truth fairly early in my life, both with a spiritual awakening and then a subsequent real interest in the big questions of life, which ultimately led me to study philosophy in university. I had actually planned a career as a scientist, but the big why questions really caught me. And that stayed with me as I developed a career as an author, then became a journalist. And even as a journalist, getting to the truth was always something really important to me. And the older I've gotten, I have to say, the more I've been concerned with the small t truth, what actually happened, rather than the large T truth, the value truths, the eternal truths of our religions and our great ethical teachings, which are really important. But you can argue about those forever. Mm-hmm. And so we are very clear in the book ProTruth to distinguish that we are talking here about the importance of small t truth when it comes to politics. And I'm sure for many of your listeners, this is obvious. Small t truth is what really happened. If I ate a bowl of oatmeal at the Tasty Diner in Bethesda, Maryland, on the 20th of April 2020 at 10 o'clock in the morning, then if you were there or if anybody else was there at that time, they could have seen me and they would have been able to know whether I had oatmeal for breakfast or something else. It was either true or false. One of those lovely binary things. It happened or it didn't. This is important in politics because we need small t to agree on small t truths so that people with different big T values can come together and compromise and agree on policy and find a way forward. For example, if there's a pandemic coming to town, what is it? How infectious is it? What are its symptoms? What can be done to treat it? Those are the sorts of truths that science can give you pretty good answers. Mm-hmm. It may change, it may take some time, but you've got scientific answers. So you need people who are able to look at those facts and then decide, well, what are our policy priorities in light of these facts? But what happens in a democracy when instead of that, you have one side saying, this virus, it's a hoax. And the other side then makes it a huge political issue. No, 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 no. It's, this is important to our way of life that you take this virus seriously. If the truth gets, with a small t, gets set aside because people with different values fight about it, you cannot create a functioning democracy. The genius of this country is it was set up so that people with different values have a reason to come together, argue, and find policy.
Yeah.
If you
You
lose
know,
the truth, you lose the heart of democracy.
I couldn't agree more with you. As a matter of fact, it's something that I've ruminated over quite a bit in the last 4 years, but especially in the last year. The you hit all kinds of buttons. Honestly, going back to being in university and following philosophy, I think, and you may correct me on this, but I think the idea of relativism, truth being relative to the situation or what's become spin on whatever we want to apply, however we want to apply it. I think that begin, like a lot of things in science, Einstein's theory of relativity was never meant to be applied to things like truth. And I don't have other examples ready for this, but I've noticed throughout time that a lot of times some theory will be proven or it'll be demonstrated to be accurate, like relativity, although scientists have been trying to disprove it ever since Einstein came out with it. But we tend to take that stuff and apply it in areas that it shouldn't apply. And so when we come to truth, when you say truth is relative, well, is your statement relative? Is your statement true? Because, obviously, if truth is relative, what you're saying is just relative to you, because I don't believe that. I believe that true is true. If I look at a piece of paper and I see there's white with black print and blue print on it, you know, that's what I see. That's true if I say that. But if you say, well, I'm colorblind and I really can't see all that stuff, so it isn't really white, black, and red. It's something else, and that's all relative to you. And we tend to apply that stuff to all kinds of things that just, I don't know, just really have no bearing on what is accurate. And I'll use that in place of truth, because truth has become one of those words that can mean just about anything you want it to mean in our society.
Right. Now, this is where we make this distinguishment between large T and small t. A lot of people have their own personal value systems, their own experiences have given them a worldview. Those are large T things. They're internal. They're really important to us.
Mm-hmm.
But the small t truths, if you apply those relativistic arguments to them, as you just said with the piece of paper and the writing on it, that gets ridiculous pretty quickly. Yeah, you can't convince somebody that the blue lettering on this paper is blue if they don't want to believe it.
Right.
But in our common world, we make these agreements between each other that work good enough so that we can do things together.
Mm-hmm.
It really ultimately doesn't matter what your experience of blue is and what my experience of blue is. What matters is if we are having a conversation about blue, we both know what we're talking about and can make an agreement on it.
Right.
So I find when people take these complicated philosophical arguments about relativism, and then they try to apply them to matters of fact that are generally well agreed on. And I mean everything from climate change to the pandemic to the election results,
Mm-hmm.
right? The reasons people question these small t truths of fact are because they're out of alignment with their large T values. They want the world to be something different than the facts show. But one of the terrible things that we've slipped into with the Trump presidency is a post-truth way of doing politics, where you tell people alternative facts, lies, that align with their values. Why? Because it feels good. If somebody tells you something that aligns with your values, you don't feel any stress. If somebody tells you something that doesn't align with your values, let's say you voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016
Mm-hmm.
and she lost, you feel tremendous emotional distress. And if you're told you lost because more people voted for the other candidate, you have to deal with that. And it's painful to face that kind of disappointment. But if instead you say, oh, actually, you didn't lose, there was massive wide-scale corruption involving hundreds of election officials and involving many senior Republican politicians, they were all in it, the whole thing is a fraud, that actually makes you feel more comfortable
Yeah.
because the small t and the large t are aligned. But that's not democracy. That's also, frankly, not being an adult, being unable to accept the facts of the matter, even if you don't like them.
Yeah, we saw a lot of that, of course, with Trump and Biden election. We saw it with Hillary and Trump. A lot of the recounts. I mean, this wasn't the first time uh, a candidate demanded a recount and different things. 2017, we saw that. We saw that in 2005 with Bush and maybe it was Gore. I know it was
It was
2005.
2000, the 2000 election.
Uh,
It was so close in Florida.
Yeah, so it's not the first time, and it's not the first time that people have been all upset about their candidates. It seems to me you've got several things that affect this. Yes, I love the way you said it. Part of being an adult is being able to accept truth and be able to know truth, to deal with truth. I mean, it kind of, in all of my life, I try to look at the worst case scenario. I try to look at the best case scenario, and I prepare for the worst. I hope for the best. But at the same time, I have to deal with truth. If I've got a problem and I refuse to acknowledge that problem, then that problem can easily overwhelm me. It can easily overcome me. It's only when you acknowledge something as true and then start to deal with it that you can. If you
Yeah,
refuse to acknowledge the truth, then you can never deal with it.
absolutely. And here's a paradox to be Ron. You in your business, part of your job is to help your clients accept the truth.
Mhm.
And if you lied to your clients and told them what they wanted to hear, well, you wouldn't get hired as a as a consultant. I'm sure the same experience is true for so many of your listeners. It's true for me in my communications consulting business, which I also do. Nobody would hire a consultant who was unethical and lied like that. Just as you wouldn't keep your doctor. If you know your doctor was lying to you, you would fire that person right away. If your spouse you suspected was lying about where they were, how they were dealing with finances, that could be reason for counseling, if not divorce. We take it very seriously when people in our lives lie to us. And yet, there seems to be this acceptance that, oh, well, politicians are going to lie to us.
Yeah.
Now, politicians probably have more impact in our life, than, or at least as much in terms of the actual structure of what our money's being spent on,
Mhm.
right, than in our personal life. Why on earth do we accept that? So, ProTruth, the movement is all about holding politicians accountable and making it and that means we have to take it as seriously when they lie to us as we would if people close to us in our personal and business relationships would lie. So that's really step one, recognizing truth matters in politics,
I mean,
not
makes
accepting the canard that all politicians lie. No, all politicians are tempted to lie, but they only do it if we let them.
Yeah, the old joke about how can you tell a politician is lying is when he moves his lips or opens his mouth, whatever the joke is.
Yeah.
It's an old joke, and unfortunately, most of us believe it, like a lot of other things. Politics in Chicago, vote early and vote often. All that kind of stuff. Is there truth to it? I don't know, and neither does anyone else at this point. That stuff has been told so long that people just accept it. I find that an awful lot of our problems, I think, comes about. Maybe the way to say this is the chickens are coming home to roost.
Mm.
We've had revisionist history talked about for the last 2 or 3 decades that I'm aware of. Um, People rewriting history, wanting things. I remember 30 years ago, I was in Denver, and there was an article in the paper about a fourth grade teacher that was teaching the Holocaust had never happened. That's 30 years ago. Um, we have a lot of this stuff that goes on in the schools, in the press. And of course, the press probably takes the brunt of this because at the end of the day, all news is censored. There isn't there isn't any way, there isn't, let me put it this way, there isn't any media that reports world news 24/7. Even if they only gave each story a minute um, throughout the 24 hours, you still wouldn't get it all on. And they're not going to do that anyway, because some news are going to increase ratings as opposed to other news, which is how CNN got started. I can't remember who said it, but they said when CNN started, news is no longer news, it's entertainment. Well, I would argue that when Walter Cronkite and the other guys did it, it was entertainment then too. As soon as it hit television, and maybe it's always been entertainment. Um, you've got complaints about it throughout history, yellow journalism and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. I mean, so I could speak as a former journalist myself here, and I actually also teach
Hope I
people
didn't tell.
how to do media interviews. Oh yeah, no, you offended me terribly, Ron, by being so accurate. But I can recognize the truth. So here's the thing that we have to keep in mind with journalism. What journalism did is it took the natural human tendency to share gossip and pass on information, and it put it into first written form and then broadcast form. Right, but it was really just an extension of the town crier: "Hear ye, the proclamation of the king," or whatever. And it's a natural thing. We humans are wired to share information, and the media developed with two like really important values. One being to share what was of value to people, what was important to people, and the other being to be as accurate as possible. And so those things lead to selection: what stories are going to be covered, and are they going to be at the top of the news or at the bottom of the news? And then how sure are we that these are true? And good news organizations, other than not yellow journalism, rigorously fact check. I've written stories for big magazines and things like that. And you write your story, and then they have their fact checkers come back and they call you and they go over every detail. My father, who was a journalist before me, had a great story about that once. He wrote an article about a good big Canadian politician. He's Canadian, and he said something about him combing his hair, and the fact checker wrote back to check and demand fact checking on which side of his head this politician parted his hair on. And so every detail gets fact checked. Now, here's where things have really, and this is in the best journalism, right? And everybody kind of knows National Enquirer, you don't trust that. In countries where journalism is young, or there's state-controlled media, or Russia today, you don't trust that because it's state-owned. But independent media, they may have different perspectives. The Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post have very different perspectives, but they fact check, right? That's the small t and the large t truth. But what's happened with the rise of the internet is the media's financing models have been utterly gutted. All of their revenues from ads have, virtually disappeared. They've been forced to go online. The revenues are much, much less, which means they simply can't afford to fact check the way they used to, and they can't afford nearly as much of a budget. But there's also a big demand. So you get more and more opinion articles and pieces.
Yeah.
And there's this rush to get it out quick. You don't have the luxury of 24 hours to fact check. So those two things have eroded the quality of journalism. Even in some of the best papers, they are struggling. And that's just a reality. At the same time, you've got the rise of all of these online platforms, the social media driven media, which are not interested in truth. They are interested in what hooks people because it aligns with their values.
Yeah.
That's a competition now to mainstream media. So the media landscape has changed so much in your lifetime and my run. It's virtually my father's journalism and journalism today, they're virtually unrecognizable, these generations apart. But we have not made the adjustment. Many people still see journalism all as one thing. You can't trust the media. Or they're too trusting. They think there's no difference between CNN and Parler and PBS.
Now, once again, you hit all kinds of buttons. So, when I think of when I was a kid, I remember reading the local little town newspaper, and they would often make mistakes, and they would have right on the front page corrections. It's a little correction sections. I assume I don't read the newspaper anymore, but I assume they still do that. even then, though, and again, you go back in I don't know, I better not talk about things I'm not sure of, but I've experienced, as long as I can remember, newspapers have accepted advertising. So that's really what sells it. A lot of magazines today, and again, I don't buy the paper. I have in the past. They discounted it to almost everything because all the revenue came from advertising. Same is true with magazines. I think I bought Wired magazine for $5 a year. Well, that's
Mm.
because advertising pays for all that stuff. They just want circulation so they can keep advertising dollars up.
Right.
If you go back to David Huntley and no, David Brinkley and Chet Huntley,
Mm-hmm.
or the McNeil Lehrer News Hour, or you go, I mean, any of those, Walter Cronkite I already mentioned, they all sold advertising. TV is an advertising medium. And in essence, now you've got the internet, it's the same thing. All of these websites uh, want advertising dollars. They want traffic. They want you to come there so they can sell you something. It is amazing to me that people don't recognize that. They tend to, again, believe that altruistically the news is true. Whatever my brand is, whether it's CNN or Fox or it's ABC or NBC, wherever you get your news, they're not motivated by money. Was it Jerry Maguire that said, follow the money? Well, that's true in a good part of life, politics, the media, and just about everything else. If you follow the money in science as well, who funded that study? Well, quite often, if coffee comes out with a really good review, it's good for you, probably funded by some coffee company. If it comes out that it's terrible for you, and occasionally it comes out both ways, probably not funded by a coffee company, maybe by a tea company. I don't know. But
Well, I would say one thing to that, Ron. In the credible news organizations, they're quite aware of that, and they do a couple of things. First of all, they often have a Chinese wall, right? A division between the editorial folks who make the news decisions and the sales and ads people who run the ads. Now, the best newspapers, they're ready to run stories that may be critical of people who are their advertisers. And in fact, if you look at the Washington Post, you'll see every now and then they'll write a story about Amazon, uh, and sometimes it's very harsh, very critical, right? But they will then put in brackets. Um, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, also owns the Washington Post.
mm-hmm.
So they make it a point to make sure that they know if they mention somebody who has an interest in their paper, that potential for bias is flagged for any reader,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's one way that they can boost their own credibility, is being really clear that everybody knows, that those sorts of things are there. They admit nobody can be free of bias, but really part of being a professional journalist is knowing your bias and doing your best to work around it so that you tell the whole story. Why? Because for a news organization, credibility is the most important thing. Now, that doesn't happen when you get to the extremes, whether to the left or the right. There, alignment with values is the most important thing. And so people will say flagrant lies that align with the values of their audience.
Have
And
you
that's where you
seen?
get this distortion in news and social media, because the motivation is different. Credibility doesn't matter, but this alignment does. And so the clicks are more because they hit people's hot button issues. But that has been shown to spread far, far more rapidly. And so gossip, rumor, innuendo, and downright flagrant lies sped are just so full on social media. It's back to what Mark Twain's old saying: a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has put its pants on.
I love Mark Twain. He had great lines. So I wonder if anybody wrote them. No, they didn't. No. So have you seen the documentary Social Dilemma? It's on
Yes,
Netflix.
yes.
For those listening or watching, I encourage you to check it out. If you don't have a Netflix membership, I mean, if you got friends that do, watch it. If you can afford to or want to buy it, it is an excellent documentary, and the only place I know. So the reason I bring it up is because it's dealing with the internet. So if we look at ads, if we look at articles, if we look at YouTube, whatever it is we look at, everything gets monitored, everything gets recorded. Um, and regular listeners to this program know that everything that happens, whether it's on or near your phone because your conversations are recorded, everything it's all part of big data. Everything gets analyzed. Everything gets sold, bought and sold, basically. So going forward with that, what you have is regardless of what you watch on the internet or do on the internet, anything you look at, whether it's TED or it's TED Talks or it's YouTube, whatever it is, that's going to be recorded. And whenever you're searching for something, it's going to gear you towards that. And we can see it easily on the extremes. If you're alt-right or you're alt-left, then what you look at is going to direct you to that information. So pretty soon, the only facts you see are the facts that particular viewpoint is showing you. I think that comes through in television as well. From the shows that we watch, they also analyze all that stuff. And if you're on cable, you'll notice that sometimes a commercial will start, but immediately there's another commercial that gets put in. Sometimes that's an honest mistake, or it's a different region. Sometimes it's because you're not supposed to watch that. They know that you'll like this ad better. Again, at the end of the day, follow the money. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we are headed to a world where more and more each individual is parsed as a product.
Yeah.
And I really right aligned with what you're saying. This thing, if it's free, then you are the product.
Yeah. If
Right?
you're not on the menu, you're on the table,
Right.
I mean,
Right.
if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
On the table.
Right?
Exactly. And this is something that we are being underinformed about, being free will, customer choice. These are the things that we're being told. Customer
Mhm.
is king, right?
Right.
But we are being sliced and diced
Yeah.
by these companies, and so that's just plain not an honest transaction. I wonder if people are going to end up turning away from much social media as a result. I'm certainly finding um, that whatever I look at in social media, I get fed more of. But here's what often happens in social media. You tend to look at the stuff that is most alarming to you, the
Right.
stuff you disagree with, or the stuff that is inflammatory, that creates fear. And so since that stuff tends to get our attention more, because that's how our brains are wired,
Mm-hmm.
we have heightened sense of alert for feelings of threat.
Right.
But we tend to look at those feelings of threat more often, and so they get magnified. And so our social media bubbles become more and more filled with danger. And because our ability to reason goes down when we are confronted danger, the opportunity for misinformation also becomes bigger. So we end up living in a big, dirty bubble
Yeah.
of misinformation
Yeah.
online. And this is actually what ProTruth, one of the biggest things we take on here, is how you can clean your bubble. Right?
Great.
The steps that you can take to start pushing back, not fall prey to any misinformation, and most importantly, not spread it to others in your network where it bounces around and around and around. And so to the heart of the ProTruth book is the ProTruth Pledge, which is the movement Gleb started. It's an online pledge you can take, which commits you to, or for which you will commit to following 12 truthful behaviors in your online presence, especially
Wonderful.
regarding politics.
Wonderful. Let's pick up with that. We're at the halfway point, and I need to remind folks who they're listening to and remind them how they can find us. So it's this is the Information Playground. You're probably listening to us in one of three ways. WVLP is a station that I've been affiliated with for years. I'm Ron Bush, by the way. I own Ron Bush Consulting. And if you're curious about your business being protected, ronbushconsulting.com is an excellent website. Check me out and send me an email if you're curious. But WVLP is a station that I started with. I've been with them for years now. They're a great community radio station. WVLP.org is a great way to stream it. Or you can, if you're local, you can listen to it at 103.1 FM. We are aired at 8 a.m. on Mondays and at 1 p.m. on Fridays. Again, check out WVLP.org. I think you'll love the website, and I hope you get involved with them. You can also find us on any of the podcast or YouTube channels under The Information Playground. You can find us on demand. You'll find a host of shows like this and other shows. Some specialize in cybersecurity. Some are like this. A lot of authors on. Really, first time I've met you, Timothy, and this has been a joy. I have a lot of these thoughts and I have a lot of these conversations, but I don't usually have anyone better informed than I am. It's really exciting for me. So check us out. Check out the Information Playground. Check out what we've got there in the past. Subscribe if you like it. I'd love to hear from you. So Timothy, tell us again how folks might be able to reach you if they're interested, and then I want to get back to the book.
Sure. The best way is through the website that is also connected with the book, and that is ProTruthPledge.org. ProTruthPledge.org. And you can also easily find there links to the book, and you can just go through the information pane there if you want to get in touch with me or with the founder of the organization, Gleb Tsipursky, my co-author.
Excellent. I appreciate that. I'll have to check it out. I didn't, as I told you before we started, I hadn't had a chance to check out the book or get into it. But I really appreciate Gleb. Gleb was on before. I read his previous book, Never Go With Your Gut, as I think I said at the beginning. Just loved it. And so when he touched base with me, I said, yeah, let's do this. So let's get into ProTruth. You had mentioned, I think you were just getting started on what we can do. So let's pick up where we left off.
Right. Well, I want to first of all say, I think all of your listeners who are in the cybersecurity business are going to get this really, really easily, because you are in the business of keeping malicious, damaging code out of your clients, and also preventing anything that is good within your clients from being stolen, right? So it's all about information and how you can build secure walls between them. And I would say that one of the big challenges that we face now in America is that the wall between lies and truthfulness has become very porous. It's crumbled.
Yes.
And that is a wall we need. There's some walls maybe we don't need, but this is a wall we do need. And we need to be very clear about what information comes into our mind that's a lie, and what information comes into our mind that's truth, and similarly, whether or not what we say is truth or is a lie. And this is the heart of what ProTruth is all about. First of all, the first part of the book is defensive chapters, how you can spot the lies politicians are tempted to tell when they're incoming. When you are getting fed information from politicians, there's a suite of kinds of lies that they tend to tell. Why do they tend to tell these lies? Because we tend to fall for them. Politicians are kind of like an expert fly fisherman who knows how to craft a fly that will fool a fish into biting it. A fly is a lie.
Great metaphor.
When politicians lie, they are crafting it so that it looks like the truth, so that we will follow it hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. So anybody who naively trusts politician is like that fish who's never been exposed to a hook before, right? And we end up being misled, and sometimes really to great harm, right? Politicians tell lies. Those lies lead to bad policies, corruption, and ultimately authoritarianism. Not just here in the United States, we're dealing with the risk of that right now, but in countries all over the world, like Turkey, Hungary, Poland, where democracies have suffered under authoritarian leaders who started off by lying to people who wanted to hear those lies. Yeah. So you've got to watch. You've got to be able to spot those lies when they're incoming. Our first chapter is called 9 Lies. And it details the 9 kinds of lies that politicians tend to tell them. I then add one in the next chapter. And I'd love to, if you like, if you want me to go into a little bit more detail about some
Sure.
of those.
Sure.
So I'll talk about the ones that are some of the ones that are easy to spot first, and then I'll talk about some of the harder ones. But one of the easy ones is something we call a glittering generality. And that is a lie that's wrapped up in an emotional statement that makes us feel very strongly aligned with what the speaker is saying. So someone may talk about their policy, but then say, this is really about patriotism. This policy is about love of your country, or this policy really is honoring veterans. And people say, yeah, because they feel the emotion of the generality very strongly. They don't actually look at what's in the middle of it. If you ever feed a dog a pill, what do? You wrap it in meat, then you feed the dog the pill, they swallow it. Well, if you hear a politician start talking in glowing, fuzzy terms about those things, look out, what's the pill inside?
Yeah.
So that's one of the easy ones. But one of the hard ones is something that I call palter. That's actually, the technical name is paltering. It's a legal term. What it means is covering a big lie with a small truth. And I've got a great metaphor for this. You can block out the sun with a quarter.
Yeah.
Right? If you hold the quarter close to your eye, you can't see the sun. It'll eclipse it. Right. Similarly, politicians are pretty good at pulling out one tiny fact and presenting it in such a way that it hides a much bigger reality. So, for example, and we talk about many different cases in this. Let me just take one around gun control. A politician who picks specific statistics that show things about suicide rates going down if there are stricter gun control laws. Well, that may be a true statistic, but there may be lots of other statistics that talk about other causes of suicide that make it really clear that that one statistic doesn't actually give you anything close to the whole picture if you're trying to argue that higher gun restrictions create lower suicide rates. So it's more than just cherry picking facts. It's taking a fact and using it to lie about something larger. So you got to really watch out for that.
There's a book that Bill Gates recommended. I think it was last year, might have been the year before, called Factfulness. Now, the gentleman that wrote it died. He's deceased now. In fact, he died not too long after writing the book. But it's an excellent book in that he takes a lot of that stuff that we believe, and he says, well, just exactly what you said. This is that statistic that that people recognize. Now, here's all the rest of the statistics from around the globe that shed a more accurate light on what we're discussing.
Right.
It's an excellent book. I'm really looking forward to reading yours. Honestly, I didn't know anything about it before this conversation. You've got me hooked already. You're reeling me. You reeled me in a while back, actually. So looking forward to it.
That's super.
So those are two different types of lies. Are there any others we should talk about before we move on?
Yes, there's a whole chapter that we devote to cognitive bias called the illusory truth effect. Okay. This is a very particular type of lie, often called the big lie. But there's so much research, and Gleb has done a lot of the work on this, my co-author. When you hear something repeated again and then again and again, the idea becomes easier for our mind to understand. And the easier it is for our mind to understand it, the more we tend to think of it as true. So let's take a fanciful example. Back before Columbus, everybody thought the world was flat. Mm-hmm. When Columbus came along and said, I think the world may be round, people really just laughed at him. They thought, you crazy, right? For really good reasons. But people went and explored. You started seeing globes appear. Over the course of, over 100 years, people started to get it that the world was round. A lot of people who'd never traveled out of their village, when confronted with the idea, the world is round, because they'd heard it lots of times before, were more likely to say, oh yeah, the world's round. Yeah, of course, that makes sense. Yeah. So the more often we hear something, the easier it is to think it's true. But politicians can use that to spread a lie. All they need to do is repeat it again and again and again. So you got to watch out for politicians who repeat something because they are creating the illusion of truth. So you have to find independent ways of checking those facts. What we do is we say, if you get a politician who may be giving you the big lie, reverse it and see whether or not that seems true. Do some research for yourself. Let's go to one we talk about in the book, Crooked Hillary.
Okay.
Now, Donald Trump said that probably 100 times and 100 tweets a day for months and months and months and months. I remember during that election ending up speaking with some people who, were not particularly political, but they would say, yeah, but Hillary, there's just something I don't trust about her. And I'd say, really, what? And they'd say, I don't know, there's just something not trustworthy about her. The big lie, Crooked Hillary, got in there, got behind their own filters. Now, the truth is, by the time Hillary was running for president, she had been in the public eye so long. She had been investigated and vetted by Republican committees so many times.
Yeah.
If there was anything crooked about her, it would probably have been found by then. But people bought the persistent lie. So that's a tough one. We can't protect ourselves from that. We have to be ready to hear a lie and immediately flip it in our head. So with Crooked Hillary, what you do is you say, oh, Crooked Hillary. Is Hillary a person with integrity? Let's investigate that. And investigate, is Hillary a person with integrity?
Mm-hmm.
See if you can prove the opposite. And if you can, just do a search. Is there actually evidence that she has been a person who's lived with integrity? I'm not going to suggest one way or the other on that.
Right.
And maybe, like most people, it would be someplace in between. But then you're working from the opposite hypothesis, and that can protect you from the damaging one. Because whenever you hear that coming your way, you could say, you hear Crooked Hillary, and you say, Hillary with integrity. That actually has more weight to it. Then spread your findings. That's the key thing. So that you're starting to counter the impact of the big lie. So the whole election fraud thing that has been going on through much of December and January. What you could say is, these elections were well conducted, just like every other election in this country. What's the evidence? Well, there were, to my count, 50 cases of election fraud heard by judges, many of them appointed by Trump himself. 49 of those cases were dismissed. The one that wasn't was a rather insignificant thing in terms of was there really election fraud. So do I trust what judges who have examined the evidence said? That's actually a pretty strong marker that there was fraud. What's the evidence that there was not fraud? What's the evidence that there was fraud? There's not really anything outside of those particular cases other than a lot of repetition.
Yeah.
So if you apply this methodology, which I explain in this whole chapter, you can start to protect yourself from the big lie. And we need to all get better at that.
So let me ask you a question. It's something I've wondered about for years. You mentioned Hillary Clinton, going back to when Bill ran. We had the Clinton Chronicles,
right?
And I read that book. There was supposedly documented proof in that book that he had done a bunch of things that he should have gone to jail for. There was a book on Obama. It was called Culture of Corruption. Same thing, all this different stuff. And a lot of this stuff is pulled from places like the New York Times, Chicago Trib, those kind of papers that you expect to lean left. Why are they going after this person? You find the same stuff on the right. There was a book, I can't remember the name of it now, but it was something about politicians and all the stuff that they get involved in. One was about on the stocks insider trading, which is not illegal if you're a senator and you're getting ready to pass a bill that's going to maybe affect the price of a piece of land, or some industry would be more likely. Well, you invest or sell depending on how that bill is going to affect it. You know what you're going to do. It hasn't hit the press yet what you're going to do, but now you've made money because you know what's coming. You and I'd go to jail for that. They don't. And so there was a book about that. Where I'm going with this is you've got all kinds of stuff, often printed by reliable publishers. I don't remember if Random House did any of those, but let's say for a moment it's a publisher of that ilk. Um, I mean, why don't they? I mean, if you got all this proof that the guy did something crooked, why don't they go to jail? Why doesn't someone prosecute them? Does that
Well,
mean that since nothing happened, that it's all a bunch of lies?
I would say, first of all, that just as you correctly indicted the media for running on advertisement,
Uh-huh.
so publishing companies run on book sales.
Yes.
And even big book companies may be sorely tempted to publish a book by an author who they know the book will sell because they have a big name or they have an inflammatory topic. And they may not do the fact checking in the same way that a really reputable media company will. Now, there are risks to them for doing that. But I would say just because it's published by a good publisher doesn't mean that you should trust everything that's in its covers. Better is to vet the author, him or herself. If you read a book that slams the Obama administration by um, a active Republican pollster, by say Karl Rove or somebody like
Right.
that,
Uh-huh.
then it's up to you to get that person's perspective rather than taking them as a neutral voice. There's also the risk of, you could probably go through any newspaper anywhere and pick and choose bits and pieces that paint a negative portrayal of anybody famous.
Right.
Um, just those bits and pieces may not actually tell you the whole story, but somebody who's looking to present, well, somebody who has a narrative in mind can cherry pick the facts and create the story that they want. So I would say you have to really watch who's the author and do they have a partisan bias,
Yeah.
and just know what that bias is before you swallow the hook of that particular book. I generally don't read books that try to slam politicians on either side. The last one I read was Mary Trump's book about her uncle, and I figured because she was a relative of Donald Trump and grew up with him, she might have an interesting perspective.
I suspect she did. I didn't read the
Yeah.
book. Yeah.
But even then, I read it skeptically because her perspective was not one of a friendly relationship with her
Yeah.
uncle.
Trump is one of those folks. He's not a politician. He's a businessman, but he had more weirdos come out of the closet when he got elected than just about. But of course, career politicians won't have that. They will be in different circles. I
Right.
guess
Right.
it makes sense when you think about it logically.
Right.
So we're getting down to the wire. What can people do aside from the research we've just discussed? What can people do to protect themselves, to make the right decisions, live their
Right.
with the right choices?
Yeah. So there's the three things. First of all, read the book, learn how to protect yourself. It's all in there. We talked about some of the techniques. Sign the ProTruth pledge. This not only commits you to cleaning your bubble,
Mhm.
but it also helps build awareness that truth matters. So you can post about it as well, and then you can share it if any of your colleagues or friends on Facebook or social media spread misinformation. You can tell them about the ProTruth pledge and help them cleanse their own bubble. And then and by the way, over 1,000 elected officials have signed the ProTruth pledge. So it's having an
Wow.
impact on people of both parties who run on it. Right now, we've got 7 sitting congresspeople who've signed the ProTruth pledge. No
Great.
presidential candidates yet, but we're working on it. And then
Yeah.
beyond that, you can join the ProTruth movement, either through the website that we've got or just through your own orientation. Present truth as a value that matters in a democracy. Talk about it, share it. If people spread things that are misinformation, particularly if you feel you're on their side, if your friends say stuff, tell them that's not helping our side by spreading things that are obviously false.
Yeah.
Here is a fact check site that shows what you said is a lie. Respectfully, let's take that down so that our side is seen as credible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well
those
said.
3 things: protect yourself, cleanse your bubble, join the movement, is what you
Great.
can do to help make truth matter.
Let's talk about. We've got a few minutes now, so let's switch to probably the biggest thing on people's minds since the election's out of the way. Inauguration will happen next Tuesday on the 20th. COVID-19 has been a real, gosh, I don't know. I don't know what word to put with it. I mean, we've got this pandemic. Here we're back to truth. We don't know where it came from. All this stuff about bats and China and all this stuff. I mean, it's gone back and forth. China's spreading things. Uh, to your point, there's an excellent book both on Russia, Sandworm, and I don't recall the authors, but it talks about Fuzzy Bear, which is an APT, an advanced persistent threat. But it also talks about other Russian hackers, family of hackers, a group of hackers. They work for the GRU, which replaced the KGB. The big breach that we just had, the SolarWinds breach, which it looks like it's. I've read yesterday. Now again, I'm reading. I'm reading publishers, and in this case, it was Cipher Brief, I believe, which I have trusted in the past. But you're right, and honestly, you never can stop investigating who you're reading or where you're getting your news from, because just because they're telling you the truth today doesn't mean they always tell you the truth. You've always got to fact check this stuff. But I understand that it's well over 100 agencies, federal agencies, that now are part of this breach. Of the Fortune 500, I've read 482 are a part of this breach. Initially, it was 425. They had 18,000 clients that were on this Orion platform that SolarWinds got hacked. Disappointedly, one of the passwords is reported to have been SolarWinds 123. I preach strong and long passwords, and again, regular viewers and listeners will know that it's 16 characters, upper lowercase, special characters and numbers, and never reuse them. SolarWinds 123, a hacker doesn't have to use password cracking software. He can guess that. So the only reason they hadn't been hacked before probably was because nobody thought they would be that simple. They didn't try to guess it. In any case, so we've got all this stuff going on, but COVID-19 is just, I mentioned SolarWinds may be the story of 2021. 2020 was COVID-19. And we had all this misinformation. We had scientists telling us that it could stay, the virus can stay on counters for up to 14 days. And that got reduced. And now a couple of months ago, one scientist said, if you're still wiping down the counters every 30 minutes, you're wasting your time because it only lives a few minutes. You know, all this stuff is as we get to know it. My problem is that it gets reported before we know it. It's theory when it gets reported. And so people don't know what to do. I think that we're going to see a huge hit to our economy in this year coming. I don't know how many restaurants and pubs and what have you have gone out of business, but I sure see a lot of vacancies when I drive by malls.
Yes.
Other businesses too, obviously. So what are your thoughts on there? Gleb has issued a white paper that says there's two new strains, and they are reported to be much more contagious than the ones that we have. What do we believe? How do we know what to believe? CDC has been hacked. WHO is over in China now, and Trump threw a whole bunch of water on the WHO, the organization. How do we believe, and how do we know what to do, and how do we get past this? There's some tall questions for you.
So let me go first to the WHO in China thing. It's going to be interesting to see what they come up with, and then it will be interesting to see the analysis of what they come up with, because they'll also be publishing their data that other experts and health reporters and professionals will make of that. I think this really is important to get to the bottom of. I think the focus needs to be more than just on finding out where did it come from, but also there needs to be, and what do we do about it? I'd say there's a small but realistic possibility that it might have been something that came from a lab. It does look, from what I've read, that it's not likely originated in a lab. It might have originated in a bat, ended up to a lab, and then gotten released. But it's much more likely, based on what I read before, that it originated in somebody catching an animal that had caught it from an animal. And that's the story of transition that makes the most sense based on what we know right now. But that's not the full story. The full story is, why the hell are we allowing wet markets in China to reopen, or really markets anywhere that are selling wild animals in areas like the Congo, like southern China, where unknown viruses exist in wild populations? Why are we not regulating those and shutting those down as a global health public good? There's plans out for those, but any attempt to get to the bottom of what caused it should be aligned with people being ready to put some budget towards making sure it never happens again.
Yeah.
It
One of the
would
new
cost about
strains.
$20 billion to shut down all illegal wildlife trafficking in the world. It cost more than $16 trillion this year to cope with the destruction of this one pandemic. Anybody who does a risk-benefit analysis might want to
Yeah.
really see that shutting those damn markets down should
Yeah.
be job number one.
It's interesting you mentioned Africa, because South Africa is where one of the new strains are from. The other one is that we've discovered it in the UK. The UK has a lot of, they've got I mean, we have immigration in this country, but they have a different immigration issue or
Yeah.
results than we
And
do.
the thing we have to remember is, where these strains are discovered doesn't necessarily mean that's where they
True.
came from. And
True.
they're all variations of what jumped out of China,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The Spanish flu epidemic, it
Right.
didn't come from Spain. It actually came from the United States, as far as anybody can tell. But it
Really?
was discovered in Spain after it had been, well, because we're in the middle of the Second World War, right?
No, the First World War.
Sorry, sure, yes, of course, right. The
Yeah.
First World War.
Yeah. Yeah. That had to be a time that people were really, I mean, we are anxious today, but can you imagine fighting the First World War? It's labeled as the war to end all wars. We'd never seen that kind of
Right.
death and all of the stuff that went on with that. And here people are dying of the Spanish flu at the same time.
Right.
Had to be a time of great, I don't know, emotional upheaval, I would guess.
Yes. And you think of that moment in time when people thought they were fighting the war to end all wars. How wrong were they
Yeah.
about what the future held? And it makes you wonder right now, for us, how wrong are we when we think about what the future is going to hold for us? So the other piece of truth is being ready to question your assumptions about the future, because those aren't grounded in fact. They're grounded in yesterday.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine just finished a book, he might be a great guest for your show, called Learning from Tomorrow. And it's about the art of strategic foresight and how this is changing the way businesses, governments, and organizations operate.
Sounds fascinating. We'll have to talk off air. So we're down to the last 2 minutes. 1 minute for a last thought. Want to hold up your book and plug it one more time, how they can reach you?
ProTruth, the book, available anywhere. ProTruthPledge.org. To find out about the ProTruth Pledge, to read it, sign it, share it with your friends, cleanse your bubble, make truth matter in politics. This is a turning point for the nation. We can turn our backs from post-truth politics. Demand our politicians speak with integrity, especially anybody who voted for the new president. Hold them to account. They're all tempted to lie. Hold them to account. Get politicians from your party to sign the pledge so that they'll feel the pain if they violate it.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for being with us. It's been a pleasure. And you've been listening to the Information Playground. Again, tune us in if you're able to at 103.1 FM. If you're in Valparaiso, certainly check us out at wvlp.org. And by all means, check us out on under the Information Playground on, you must have a bad back problem.
It's stiff.
Oh, I got news for you. The older you get, the worse it gets. So but in any case, check us out under the Information Playground on YouTube and any of the podcast platforms, I believe. So thank you for being with us. Join us next time, and stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.